Today on Locked On Dolphins, a look at some of the way too early 2024 NFL draft prospects that have caught my eye as I have begun to do my player evaluations for Athlon Sports.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Cal Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, a decade-long draft neck, former director of scouting at the Draft Network, and your host here. Want to thank you guys for making Locked On Dolphins your first Miami Dolphins listen of the day, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. We are coming out of the bye week. But the way that we usually do this in-season programming here on this show, Monday is post-game. Tuesday is film review on offense and defense from the coach's film of the game that just happened. And Wednesday starts the new opponent. So we got a little bit of time on our hands here. And we're going to use the time to do an NFL draft prospect show today. And then we're going to do Power to the Pod tomorrow. Before Wednesday, we turn our eyes to the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, I included my draft credentials at the top here, which I usually don't anymore because I am no longer full-time in that spectrum and more full-time in the Dolphins spectrum. But I had spent 4.5 years with the Draft Network as their director of scouting and one of their co-founders. And before that, had my own third-party scouting service and been consulting for smaller NFL agents looking at potential players that they were interested in representing and giving them my opinions on those players. So that's kind of a little bit of my background. I got started with that in 2012, had a couple really valuable mentors who kind of got me started on that path and that process. But I say all that to say we're going to go into draft prospects, and this is not just me pulling rabbits out of a hat, because over at Athlon Sports, I have actually been doing player evaluations since the late summer, and we've built up a pretty sizable chunk of players. I've got about 150 players written up and graded, and the objective has been to identify who are fits for the Miami Dolphins for today's show. So I looked at this full list. I don't do the evals through the scope of the Dolphins, but I know what scope the Dolphins care about players. And we're going to go through all the positions and just shout out a couple of names that I really like, that I think would make sense for the Dolphins, depending on what their personnel decision-making process looks like, players that they're going to ultimately bring back, players that they're going to re-sign. That's all still very fluid. So because of that, we're going to kind of do everything. And we're just going to look position by position. But before we get there, it's worth acknowledging the week that just happened as it pertains to the Dolphins, because we're going to talk about NFL draft prospects and look towards next April. And the Dolphins are in the midst of a season in which they're 6-3, first place in the division. The Bills play tonight. We'll see what that does for the divisional standings. We had a great week. Week 10 was a great week for the Miami Dolphins. Week 10 saw the Baltimore Ravens lose in the last minute to the Cleveland Browns. Week 10 saw the Jacksonville Jaguars get absolutely smoked by the San Francisco 49ers at home. We saw the Cincinnati Bengals come all the way back and then lose a game to the Houston Texans to drop them to 5-4. We saw the New York Jets fall on Sunday Night Football and fail to reach the end zone. They fell to 4-5 on the season in the AFC East standings. The Patriots lost on Sunday morning. A lot of good. The Chargers lost. Now, maybe you wanted the Chargers to win so that the Dolphins can point and say, oh, look, we have a win against a team with a winning record. But for the grand scheme of things, from a seeding perspective in the playoffs, the Chargers fell to 4-5 on the season. And the Dolphins' next opponent, the Raiders, is 5-5. They are 500 through 10 games. And they have a little bit of momentum. They've won 2 in a row. But it's worth acknowledging for Miami, and then Mike McDaniel comes out and says that Devon Achane's going to have his practice window opened. It does not sound like we'll get everybody back. Mike McDaniel referred to a couple of guys as week to week, and that included Robert Hunt. Anytime you get week to week, it doesn't bode well for the week upcoming. You get Rob back for the Jets, I think you probably feel a little bit better about it. And Rob did not play against the Chiefs. Rob did not play the second half of the Patriots game. So you're talking about 4 weeks would be the rest period to get him ready for the Jets and potentially Quinn Williams. So I'm hoping that's something that the Dolphins can manifest, because the guy you got to be worried about this week's on the edge with Max Crosby. So let's go position by position. And we're going to do all positions. I'm not just going to be exclusive here and do only positions that we regard as positions of need. I'll include quarterback, and we'll start with quarterback. Now, the Dolphins, you're not drafting a starting quarterback. You're probably looking for a day 3 developmental type quarterback. And of course, any proposition of adding a quarterback, it has to be right value. And right value, when this team's in a competitive window, you're assuming Tua Tagovailoa is going to get a contract extension to reduce that salary cap hit this upcoming year. I've done, how many? 15 quarterbacks. The vast majority of these guys, I think, are largely going to be day 1 and day 2 quarterbacks. Some of these guys will go back to school. If I had to pick a player who I kind of liked in the range, which would be probably mid to late day 3 that I like, it would probably be Jordan Travis from Florida State. He is kind of fluid, can get off schedule. He's a winner. He's been really successful with the Florida State program going back to last year. But guys like Bo Nix and Drake May and Caleb Williams, they're off the table. It's not going to happen, right? And the Dolphins have a quarterback that they're committed to in this winning window. A guy like Cam Ward, I think, would be a dream come true, but I think Cam Ward's probably going to get drafted in a stratosphere that's not going to make sense for the Miami Dolphins to commit to him. If you told me the Dolphins could come out of this draft with a bunch of extra draft picks, and you wanted like a high ceiling, long-term, turn yourself into a quarterback factory like the Philadelphia Eagles have done, where they don't shy away from taking another quarterback with a big contract on the market, because they know, worst case scenario, they can then turn around and develop that player and flip that player, or they can transition away from the big contract player. And again, that's a whole bunch of team building ideology that's not suggestions. Okay. So if I take the value off and I look at realistically what Miami needs, a guy like Cam Ward from Washington State, who's really creative, works with some scheme throws, spread system at Washington State, really good ball handling skills, RPO, play action passing, a little bit bigger than Tua is, really dynamic arm, just high variance player. That's probably the player that I would point to at the quarterback position, that if you didn't put it through the lens of value. Running backs. There's a lot of good running backs in this class. I've done about 15 of these guys as well. Guy I really like that I don't think we're going to see is Jonathan Brooks from Texas. He tore his ACL last week, which is a big bummer. He was Bijan Robinson's heir at University of Texas. But its usual names at the top of this class include like Blake Corum and Travion Henderson and Raheem Rocket Sanders. Henderson's from Ohio State. Blake Corum from Michigan's on this list. Braylon Allen from Wisconsin. Trey Benson's from Florida State. I really like Bucky Irving. Bucky Irving is from the University of Oregon, and he's not the biggest player. Like, he's kind of built like Myles Gaskin from a stature perspective, but he's faster, and he's one of the more elusive short area running backs that I've seen in quite some time. So he's got speed to get to the edge and get outside. Oregon runs a lot of zone. But you box this guy in, and the analogy is, I don't know if you've ever seen the octopus on the boat, that he's crawling around on the boat deck and he finds a crack like the size of a credit card in the side of the hull of the boat. And this big old octopus slips right through that credit card size crack in the side of the hull of the boat. And that's like trying to tackle Bucky Irving in the backfield. Like, the first guy never gets him down. And what I think is really interesting about the running back position is I don't think you can table any name and say that they're off the table for Miami, because there is not like a clear-cut, obvious hierarchy like there was last year with Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson. Like, I don't think any of these guys are in close to that stratosphere. I have a lot of day 2 players at the running back position. And because of that, I kind of feel like Miami could get their pick of the litter if they wanted to add, like, say, Raheem Mostert, who's 31 years old, 31 years old. Jeff Wilson, they're both going to the last year of their contracts next year. And Chris Brooks has shown you some pop, but Chris Brooks is a UDFA who played in 2 games in garbage time. If you wanted to put somebody in to bring with Devon Achane, what kind of player would you want to bring? That's a whole different ideology, a whole bunch of questions that we really can't get into now because we got a whole other bunch of positions that we need to get into here on Locked On Dolphins. So stick with us. Are you thinking about maybe going to the game at the Rock? The Dolphins are playing the Raiders in Week 11 at home at Hard Rock Stadium. It's obviously a very exciting time for Dolphins fans to get back into the swing of things. But if you're thinking about going and you're a little bit of a fly by the seat of your pants kind of person, I got good news for you. Gametime has you covered. Gametime is obsessed with finding ways to save you money on your tickets, but they're also the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase, even if you are buying last-minute tickets, because they show you the view from your seat. They give you upfront prices, so there's no hidden fees, and you can buy tickets in seconds with a few taps, and it is sent directly to your phone. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event. Even an hour after it starts, it is the place to find last-minute tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. I do need to ask you guys a serious question. You ever have trouble performing? You ever out with your partner and feel like you can't get the job done? Does it get worse when there's lots of people around? Is it especially bad with guacamole? I'm talking about weak chips, the kinds that can't handle a hearty scoop of guac. Zach's Mighty Tortilla Chips understands the pain of trying to dip with a weak tortilla chip. No one wants to go soft on the guac. Well, I got good news for you because Zach's Mighty are made the right way because they're actually cut from real tortillas. So they're literally built to dip. Crisp, corny, organic, these chips will take your tailgate at the Rock to the next level. And Zach's Mighty Tortilla Chips are now available at Publix in sea salt, lime, and nacho flavors. You can find them in the deli section with the dips. Head on over to Publix, grabs a bag of Zach's Mighty, and scoop that guac like the stud that you are. We're going to move over to wide receiver, which if you're looking for a hearty scoop of a position that's eligible for this year's class on your chip, you came to the right place. The wide receiver position in this year's class is absolutely crazy loaded. It is crazy loaded how many wide receivers I have evaluated that I would consider to be day 1 or day 2 players. I got about 18. I wish I was kidding. It's technically 17, 16. Not a math guy. But I have my table up and I have tight ends and slot receivers in the same sheet with wide receivers. I'm just going to read you some names, okay? And some of these, they're not applicable to you, so just bear with me. Marvin Harrison Jr., not applicable to you, Dolphins fans. My apologies. Emeka Egbuka, Ohio State. Both of those two. Those are my top 2 wide receivers eligible. You have Roman Wilson, University of Michigan, slot-type player. You have Xavier Worthy, Texas. Brian Thomas, LSU. Malik Neighbors, LSU. Troy Franklin, Oregon. Tez Walker, North Carolina. Rome Odunze, Washington. Malachi Corley, Western Kentucky. Xavier Leggett, South Carolina. Keon Coleman, Florida State. Adonai Mitchell, A.D. Mitchell, University of Texas. Johnny Wilson, Florida State. Jermaine Burton, Alabama. Jalen Polk, University of Washington. Ladd McConkey, University of Georgia. A lot of wide receivers. I love me some Roman Wilson. Now, are you going to draft another wide receiver with the needs that you have at the offensive line and the defensive line and potentially in the secondary if you're going to transition away from some other contracts? Probably not. But I think Roman Wilson is the kind of player that the Dolphins, like if you want a long-term replacement for Braxton Berrios, who I think has a higher ceiling as a football player, it's Roman Wilson. And Brax is on a 1-year contract, and Roman does special team stuff and handles punts and kicks too. And he runs in the 4-3, so like he can scoot. So I love Brax. Brax just made the superlatives last week as one of the unsung heroes of this football team in the first half of the season, particularly for his work on special teams. But there's several different ways that you could choose to save money in cap space. One is to let a big name go, and the other is to let several smaller names go. And Braxton Berrios on the The ledger is $3.5 million if you let him go and Brandon Jones go and one other player who I don't have a good example off the top of my head, Raekwon Davis go. You could save the same amount of money as saving a bigger money contract. We'll see what way the Dolphins choose to go. I think that if they're going to choose to do the latter of those two, they're going to need to load up on more draft picks and find them. But if they're going to do the former, then maybe you bring all those guys back. And then Roman Wilson would not make the most sense for this football team. I will shout out one other name, and it's Xavier Leggett from South Carolina. If Mike McDaniel wants a Deebo Samuel, like we traded for Chase Claypool, who's also in a contract year, and I'm going to be honest, like the Chase Claypool thing, it ain't working for me. It's not going particularly well. With a lot of missed blocks against the Chiefs. This is a complicated offense to step into midseason and have a really good feel for what you're doing. But the run game contributions were bad against the Chiefs. They were pretty bad. So Xavier Leggett is a big-bodied receiver who wins after the catch and has been clocked on GPS over 22 miles an hour. You want a Deebo Samuel type player for this offense? That's your guy. That's your guy. I haven't done a ton of tight ends, but I do have a few that I like quite a bit. I'm going to read some names, and I've done a grand total of 8 tight ends. So not a ton. The vast majority of them are early day 3 types. So Dolphins should have a healthy amount of swing in a lot of these guys. Brock Bowers, Jadavion Sanders, Ben Sinnott, Brevin Spanford, Theo Johnson, Luke Lachey, Oronde Gadsden, Cade Stover. Of those names, Jadavion Sanders is the most intriguing. He's from the University of Texas, but he's a passing game threat. He's not really a blocker. I admire the effort. Him as a fringe first-round grade type player. Brock Bowers would be a home run selection. I'd be very surprised if the Dolphins were in a stratosphere of the draft to sniff Brock Bowers, though. Obviously, they like what they have. You got a UDFA and Julian Hill, who's a cheap contract that's going to be here for a while because he's a 6-figure annual salary rookie contract for the next few years. You got a lot of player control their next 3 years worth. And you might pay $4 million to Julian Hill for the next 3 years combined. I like Ben Sinnott from Kansas State a lot. That's a multi-tool weapon. You think about what Kyle Juszczyk is in San Francisco. You think about what Alec Ingold can be. And obviously they extended Alec Ingold just like they extended Durham Smythe. Do you want one more body to make sure that like you have reinforcements there? If you do, that's a name that could make some sense. Oronde Gadsden should sound familiar. Oronde Gadsden II. Now he had a season-ending injury earlier this year. He might just come back. He's about a 225-pound flex wide receiver, tight end, hybrid type player. So I don't know how good of a fit he is, but obviously he has dad's ball skills and hands, which is really cool. Cade Stover would be the other one that I would point to as just an absolute war daddy in the trenches. If you want an inline player who's not quite as versatile, but a guy who you'll throw the ball to 30 times all season and be totally fine with it, but is just going to whoop butt for you up front, Cade Stover at Ohio State is pretty high up on my short list. And we'll go offensive line. We'll do interior and offensive tackle combined here. And here's what I could tell you. I have about 24 names of offensive linemen that I have done. And of those 24 names, at tackle and interior offensive line alike, I have 14 that are day 1 and day 2 prospects. So if the Dolphins are going to let somebody walk on this offensive line, Austin Jackson, Connor Williams, Robert Hunt, presumably I would presume the left guard position is going to be wide open anyway. Would they transition financially? Would it make sense at any stage to transition away from Teron Armstead? Y'all got options. Now, there'll be a run. Probably not with the interior guys, but from an offensive tackle perspective, you're going to get a run pretty early. The good news is I have 7 offensive tackles with first-round grades, and I have another one that's fringe. Olu Fashanu, Penn State. J.C. Latham, Alabama. Armarius Mims, Georgia. He just came back. He had tightrope surgery, the same thing that Tua had on his ankle he had earlier this season. Talise Fuaga, Oregon State. Graham Barton can play all 5 spots on the offensive line. Duke. Jordan Morgan, University of Arizona, very reminiscent of Matthew Bergeron from last year's class. Joe Alt, Notre Dame, and Troy Fatanu from University of Washington. Some people think he's a guard. I think he has the movement skills to play at tackle. Those are the tackles. Guys, those guys all have first-round grades. If you want to tackle, if you want to draft a starting tackle, you can be picking in the 20s. And you get a starting tackle. If you're going to be picking at 32, you might say, hey, we might keep the tackle and let one of the interior guys walk, because we'll probably get our pick of the litter, the interior guys, just because they don't get drafted that high. And that's guys like Cooper Beebe, Kansas State. Don't think he's a great fit for this system. Donovan Jackson, Ohio State. I would point to some of those other offensive linemen that we mentioned already, like Graham Barton and Jordan Morgan, who have interior flexibility. Graham Barton legit can play all 5 spots. That's super attractive for an offensive line prospect. Zach Frazier from West Virginia is more of a day 2 guy, but I really, really like his game as well. So you're going to have options there on the offensive line. That's the good news. Now, we are going to power through the defensive side of the ball, and that's next here on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Want to make sure you get in on this NFL action for the back half of the season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. It's $150 if your team wins. So throw $5 on the Dolphins and the money line against the Raiders. And if they take care of business, FanDuel gives you $150 in bonus bets. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on this action than right now, because they have spreads, player props, over-unders, money line, and more. The app is super easy to use. They have all the options that you would want. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off your NFL second half the right way with FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Defensively, again, we're running through all positions, so I don't want anybody to walk away from this conversation feeling somewhere or another that I discussed something or did not discuss something. The edge guys, I don't love the class. I'm going to be honest. I don't love the edge class. Now, do I think there's some players that would be really intriguing to fit within the Dolphins scheme? Yes, I do. JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State. Everybody was kind of hoping he would take a big leap this year. I don't think it necessarily happened unless he's playing against Penn State. Jared Verse is probably the consensus top guy. He has also not taken the leap that a lot of people thought. Are these guys going to be in a position to kind of linger into the late teens, early 20s, in which the Dolphins might be able to take the bat off their shoulder and go swing and get a guy if they feel like that would really be a needle mover for them? And you expect that Emmanuel Ogbah will be gone. You got Bradley Chubb. You got Jalen Phillips. There's no such thing as too many good pass rushers. You have Andrew Van Ginkel. That's another good example of a contract that maybe you don't bring back if you're going to opt to seed the depth of the team. But again, if you do that, then you're going to have to really pool some extra draft capital to really restock the well, if you will. I like Leatu Latu from UCLA. The problem is there's some big-time medical flags there. And if you don't pass the medical component, then you're just going to be off the board. And I would not be surprised if, based off the tape, he's the top edge guy drafted. It's kind of the same conversation around Jalen Phillips, also from UCLA, and then transferred to Miami. Latu's a good player. He's just got medicals that I don't think the Dolphins can afford to risk, at least not in the early chapters. Chop Robinson, Penn State. I like Landon Jackson from Arkansas. He's built like Emmanuel Ogbah, really long arms, really stout frame, surprising flexibility. I think Ogbah, coming back off of the injury, has just not had the same pop to him, I guess. And obviously his injury was an upper body injury, so I don't think that's a limiting factor. Now, if you wanted to replace Andrew Van Ginkel with a draft pick, I do have a mid-round guy that has caught my attention, and it's Jonah Ellis from University of Utah. A little bit more of an undersized player, Energizer Bunny type player, just like Andrew Van Ginkel. I think he really brings some appeal. If I were to look to the interior defensive line, this is a spot where you need some bodies. We're going to need some reinforcements here. Johnny Newton from Illinois is the top consensus player. He's played out of his mind. He's going to be top 10 pick, I think. I really liked the traits of Leonard Taylor from University of Miami. That has not come together, which leaves the next name on the list for me is T'Vondre Sweat from University of Texas. If you wanted to pick T'Vondre Sweat, you could probably get it in the back half of the first 20 picks of the second round. He's a 340, 350, 360-pound nose tackle that's got a little bit of early down juice to him. I think he's probably a little bit of a better pass rusher than Raekwon Davis. He anchors better than Raekwon Davis. But he's a nose tackle. Like, what's the value of that? If you want depth and flights and personnel flexibility for Vic Fangio, replacing Raekwon Davis with a nose tackle that plays like a true nose tackle, because I do think Raekwon still is just a little bit in between the two, between a typical interior defensive lineman and a nose tackle. That's a name that pops to me a bit. I like Chris Jenkins Jr. from University of Michigan. I just don't love him in the stratosphere where he is talked about at times as a potential first-round draft selection on the Bruce Feldman's freaks list. I've not done a ton of linebackers, but if you're going to transition away from Jerome Baker, and obviously that's a big chopping block name for a lot of Dolphins fans, and understandably so. His salary's significant. A couple of guys that I like. One of which is a big-time medical threat, but might be the best tape that we have all season. And it's Peyton Wilson from North Carolina State. Peyton Wilson has the exact same tape with better range than Jack Campbell, who went in the top 20 of the Detroit Lions last year. But unlike Jack Campbell, who left early, University of Iowa, this is a sixth-year senior that's had multiple season-ending knee injuries and multiple season-ending shoulder surgeries. It's not ideal. So how do you transpose first-round tape, top 20 tape, with, honestly, UDFA medicals? There's a juncture where it makes sense and the risk is worth the reward. But if you do that, please, Miami, have a backup veteran already on the roster. Do not put all your eggs in that basket. And unfortunately, I don't know how much we're going to be able to be banking on Channing Tindall to be that guy for us. He just has not manifested yet. At cornerback, I have really found myself taken to Terrion Arnold as the quote-unquote other Alabama guy. And it's funny, I did the consensus media top Alabama corner, Kool-Aid McKinstry. I did him, I have the dates here, on July 25th. I did his write-up. Obviously been keeping tabs. I did Terrion Arnold's yesterday. Arnold's a better player. It's not close. So Arnold, Kalen King from Penn State, Cooper DeJean from University of Iowa. Those are kind of my upper class. McKinstry's in the next class down, along with Denzel Burke from Ohio State, Josh Newton from TCU, TJ Tampa's a big, long, physical player from Iowa State, Kamari Lassiter from University of Georgia, Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo. That's a really intriguing day two type player as well, smaller school player, but very, very, very productive, outstanding ball skills. There's a lot of options here. What does the future hold for Xavier Howard? Big contract. You could transition away from post-June 1st. Do you want to do that? Do you want to swing the other way and make a longer commitment to him, knowing that it's going to bite you at some point? You're going to have to transition away from it and restructure him to get more cap room for this upcoming year. Conversations for another day. The point is, there's a lot of body types and a lot of players that I like at the cornerback position. And then safety. I've got four names that I like. And you've got Deshaun Elliott's expiring contract. We don't know what his long-term prognosis is with the Dolphins. Cam Kinchins, University of Miami. True free center field free safety type player. I think he's going to be the best safety when I don't put them through the lens of scheme. If I had to pick who I think the best safety is for the Dolphins, it's Tyler Nubin from Minnesota. because I think he complements Javon Holland very, very, very well. Cole Bishop from University of Utah, rangy tackle magnet type player, kind of like what Deshaun Elliott is for the Dolphins now. And then Javon Bullard, who's a smaller player, is the other safety that I like. He's at the University of Georgia. So that's a whole slew of names, just kind of threw them at you. And I apologize for doing so, but I want to put it on your radars where we feel kind of the early strengths and weaknesses are of this draft class relative to Miami's needs and the intersection there. And then we'll start getting a better idea as we get later into the calendar where the intersection is for need, availability at that stage in the draft, and go from there. But we made good use of the bye week, had a chance to talk a little NFL draft. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you for checking out the show. I'm Cal Krabs, your host here on Locked On Dolphins. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Fins up. Make it a great rest of your day. I'm out of here. Peace.